The scent of sandalwood lingered faintly in the air, a comforting constant in Pei Xinyan's home. Sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Shen Yan sat perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the knuckles white. The silence of the room pressed against her, heavy and expectant. She hadn't spoken much since arriving at her uncle's doorstep, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within her, a chaotic storm she couldn't yet articulate. Pei Xinyan watched her from across the room, his gaze filled with a quiet concern that mirrored her own inner turmoil. He poured a cup of tea, the delicate porcelain clinking softly against the saucer, a small sound that seemed to reverberate in the stillness. He offered it to her, his hand steady, his voice gentle. "Drink something warm, Nian Nian." She accepted the cup, her fingers brushing against his. The warmth seeped into her cold hands, a small comfort in the face of the chilling indifference she had escaped. She raised the cup to her lips, the fragrant steam swirling around her face, momentarily obscuring her vision. The taste was familiar, a comforting blend of herbs and spices, a taste of home, a home she had never truly known within the walls of the Shen mansion. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant, as if afraid to break the fragile peace that had settled between them. She took another sip, the warmth spreading through her, a stark contrast to the icy emptiness that had become her constant companion. She swallowed, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. "Uncle," she began, her voice barely a whisper, raspy from disuse. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Could she truly speak? Could she finally unleash the words that had been clawing at her throat for so long? He waited patiently, his silence a gentle encouragement. He didn't press, didn't pry. He simply offered her the space she needed, the understanding she craved. His presence was a silent promise, a reassurance that she was safe, that she could finally let go. She looked down at the teacup in her hands, the swirling leaves mirroring the turmoil within her. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling that ran through her. The memories, vivid and sharp, flashed before her eyes, the cold dinners, the ignored pleas, the constant feeling of being invisible, a ghost haunting the halls of a house that was never truly hers. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting his. They never truly saw me, uncle," she whispered, the words heavy with unspoken pain. I was just a shadow in their lives." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years of suppressed emotions. A single tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek, a silent testament to the pain she had endured. She quickly wiped it away, ashamed of her weakness. She had learned to hide her tears, to bury her emotions deep within, a survival mechanism in a world that offered little comfort. Pei Xinyan's expression darkened, a flicker of anger flashing across his usually calm features. He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, hesitant to touch, as if afraid to shatter her fragile composure. He retracted his hand, clenching it into a fist, the knuckles white against his skin. He took a deep breath, composing himself. "Tell me, Nian Nian," he said, his voice low and steady, "tell me everything." And so, she did. The words tumbled out, a torrent of suppressed emotions finally finding release. She spoke of the constant neglect, the subtle cruelties, the gnawing feeling of being an outsider in her own home. She spoke of the lavish parties thrown for Shenwana, the expensive gifts showered upon her brothers, while she was left with hand-me-down clothes and a constant feeling of inadequacy. She spoke of the gnawing hunger, the empty stomach, the nights she spent crying herself to sleep, clutching a worn-out teddy bear, her only source of comfort in a world that offered none. They never even noticed, she choked out, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. They were so busy with their own lives, their own concerns, that they never even noticed that I was starving. The bitterness in her voice was palpable, a raw wound exposed to the air. "You've been pleasing the Shen family for so long," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair, "but you haven't even had a full meal. In this life, my family only has my uncle. As for the Shen family, all they have done to me I will never forget." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken understanding. Pei Sinian listened, his face a mask of controlled fury, his heart aching for the pain she had endured. He had suspected, he had seen glimpses of the neglect, the subtle slights, but he had never truly grasped the depth of her suffering. He had failed her, he realized with a pang of guilt. He had been so busy with his own life, his own work, that he had allowed this to happen. He reached out, taking her hand in his grip firm and reassuring. "I'm so sorry, Nian Nian," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have done more. I should have seen." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and gratitude. "It's not your fault, uncle," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "You were the only one who ever cared." He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "You're safe now, Nian Nian," he said, his voice filled with a fierce protectiveness. "I won't let them hurt you again." And in that moment, in the quiet sanctuary of his home, surrounded by the comforting scent of sandalwood, Shen Yan felt a glimmer of hope, a flicker of resilience ignite within her weary heart. The Shen family may have discarded her, but she was not broken. She would rise from the ashes, stronger and more determined than ever. The college entrance exams loomed ahead, a beacon of hope, a promise of a future free from the shadows of the past. She would succeed, not for them, but for herself. She would build her own life, her own happiness, brick by brick, until the towering walls of the Shen family's indifference were nothing more than a distant memory. The opulent chandelier cast a cold, sterile light across the Shen family's lavish living room. Shen Huijin tapped a restless finger against the polished mahogany of the side table, the rhythmic click echoing the disquiet in his heart. He could still see the bewilderment in his father's eyes, the slack jaw and the tremor in his hand as he held the bank statement. 7,200 yuan. A pittance. A mere fraction of what they spent on a single family dinner. And yet, that paltry sum represented 2 years of Xiaoyu's salary, the nanny they'd ostensibly hired for Shen Yan. He shifted uncomfortably, the plush velvet cushion offering no solace. He recalled Shen Yan's quiet presence, a shadow flitting through the periphery of their opulent lives. Had they truly been so blind? So engrossed in their own world of privilege that they hadn't noticed the silent suffering unfolding right under their noses? He remembered the rare occasions he'd encountered her in the hallways, the slight stoop of her shoulders, the downcast gaze that seemed to avoid meeting anyone's eyes. He'd dismissed it then as shyness, as introversion. Now, the memory pricked at his conscience like a shard of glass. "The clothes you're wearing was changed by the nanny. Zhang Shi also helped you clean your room. It's the same as before. 200 a month. 7,200 yuan. How is that possible?" His father's voice, usually booming with authority, now held a bewildered tremor. Shen Chang's face, usually ruddy with robust health, had paled to an ashen gray. He looked smaller, somehow, diminished by the weight of the revelation. Song Chunlin, their mother, sat rigid on the silk-upholstered sofa, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her lips moved silently, forming words that never quite found their voice. Denial. He recognized it. The same denial she employed whenever confronted with anything unpleasant, anything that threatened to disrupt the carefully constructed facade of their perfect family. A flashback, sharp and vivid, intruded upon his thoughts. Shen Yan, a small, thin figure huddled in a corner of the garden, a tattered book clutched in her hands. He'd been on his way to a party, dressed in designer clothes, his hair styled to perfection. He'd glanced at her, a fleeting, dismissive glance, and then continued on his way, the image fading quickly from his mind. Now, that image was etched into his memory, a stark reminder of his own callous indifference. Shen Huili paced restlessly, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. I just assumed she preferred being on her own," he stammered, his voice laced with a defensive edge. "She never complained. Never asked for anything." A bitter laugh escaped Shen Huizhou's lips. "Never asked for anything because she knew it would be pointless," he said, his voice dripping with self-reproach. "We created an environment where she felt she couldn't ask. We neglected her." His gaze fell upon a framed family portrait on the mantelpiece. Shen Yan was there, on the edge of the picture, her small face barely visible in the shadow of Shen Wan'er's elaborate dress. Another flashback. This time, it was the dining room. Shen Yan sitting silently at the far end of the long table, picking at a meager portion of rice. The rest of the family, engrossed in their own conversations, barely acknowledging her presence. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of voices, the aroma of delicious food, all of it now seemed to mock him, a symphony of their collective neglect. Xiaoyu's voice, trembling but resolute, cut through the tense silence. "She has been living in the utility room and he was always hungry." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. The image of their spacious, unused utility room flashed in his mind. Cold, damp, devoid of any comfort. A stark contrast to the luxurious bedrooms they each occupied. Shame, hot and suffocating, washed over him. His mother finally spoke, her voice brittle. "That's absurd. Xiaoyu, I think you're exaggerating." But even as she uttered the words, her eyes darted nervously around the room, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. The veneer of denial was cracking. The weight of their collective guilt settled upon them like a suffocating shroud. The realization that they had not only failed Shen Yan but had actively contributed to her suffering was a bitter pill to swallow. The carefully constructed image of their perfect family, their comfortable lives built upon a foundation of privilege and indifference, began to crumble. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken recriminations, with the ghosts of their past actions. He recalled another fragmented memory. A glimpse of Shen Yan's thin arm, a dark bruise blooming beneath the pale skin. He'd seen it, fleetingly, as she reached for a book on a high shelf. He hadn't questioned it. Hadn't even paused to consider how it got there. He'd simply looked away. The memory burned in his mind now, a searing brand of his own culpability. The revelation of Shen Yan's severe malnourishment, confirmed by the family doctor, shattered the last vestiges of their denial. The doctor's words, clinical and detached, echoed in the stunned silence. Her condition is consistent with prolonged nutritional deficiency. It's concerning. The dam of their carefully constructed indifference finally broke. Tears streamed down Song Chunlin's face, her carefully maintained composure dissolving into a torrent of guilt and remorse. Shen Chang sat slumped in his chair, his shoulders bowed, his face etched with a deep, weary sadness. The brothers, each lost in their own private hell of regret, avoided each other's gaze. The opulent living room, once a symbol of their wealth and status, now felt like a prison, the silence punctuated by the heavy weight of their unspoken apologies that would never reach the one who deserved to hear them. Shen Yan was gone, having escaped the gilded cage they had unknowingly built around her. And in her absence, they were left to grapple with the wreckage of their own making. The realization that they had not only failed to protect her but had been complicit in her suffering was a burden they would carry for the rest of their lives. The air hung thick and heavy, shimmering with the oppressive heat of early summer. Jianda High School affiliated middle school buzzed with a nervous energy, a hive of anxious anticipation. The red banners proclaiming "Congratulations to the graduating class" flapped listlessly in the humid breeze, their celebratory message at odds with the taut faces of the students gathered around the notice boards. This was the day. The day their futures, meticulously crafted or haphazardly stumbled upon, would be revealed in stark black and white, the college entrance exam results. Shen Yan stood apart from the throng, a solitary figure beneath the shade of a plane tree. Her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, were clammy despite the heat. She hadn't slept properly in days, the fear of failure a constant, gnawing presence. Not failure for herself, she thought bitterly, but for him. Uncle Pei Sinian. He had given her everything: a home, stability, unwavering belief. Failure would be a betrayal, a shattering of the fragile peace she had found in his care. A flicker of movement at the edge of the crowd caught her eye. A familiar silhouette, tall and lean, threaded its way through the throng. Shen Huijin. Her adoptive brother. A wave of nausea washed over her, a visceral reaction etched deep within her bones. He was a stark reminder of everything she had escaped, the gilded cage of the Shen family, the suffocating indifference that had been her daily bread. He stopped a few feet away, an unreadable expression on his usually impassive face. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, years of shared history, of neglect, of silent resentment. He looked different, Shen Yan realized. Thinner, the sharp angles of his face more pronounced. The casual arrogance that had always clung to him like an expensive cologne seemed to have faded, replaced by something akin to certainty. Shen Yan, he finally said, his voice a low rumble that barely carried over the excited chatter of the students. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her own expression carefully blank. Shen Huijin. He shifted his weight, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Heard you were taking the exams here. It wasn't a question. Shen Yan remained silent, her eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of the pavement beneath her feet. Each pebble, each crack, seemed to hold a memory, a shard of the past she desperately tried to bury. How did you do? He asked, the words seemingly dragged from him against his will. A bitter laugh threatened to bubble up from her throat. How did she do? After years of being treated as an afterthought, a shadow in the opulent Shen household, after being denied the tutors, the resources, the very encouragement that had been lavished upon her siblings. She wanted to scream, to unleash the years of pent-up anger and resentment. But she didn't. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She wouldn't give any of them the satisfaction. It doesn't concern you, she said, her voice low and steady, a testament to the hard-won composure she had cultivated. He flinched, a flicker of something akin to hurt crossing his features. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, masked by the familiar indifference. Father Motherthy, he stammered, then stopped, as if the words were choking him. She didn't need him to finish the sentence. She knew what he meant. They were curious. Perhaps even worried. The thought was absurd, laughable. Their concern was a belated, hollow gesture, a pathetic attempt to reclaim a relationship they had never bothered to cultivate. Turning away, she moved towards the notice board, the sea of faces blurring around her. The numbers swam before her eyes, a dizzying array of hopes and disappointments. She scanned the list, her breath caught in her throat. There it was. Her name. And next to it, a number that seemed to burn itself onto her retinas. 720. The highest score. In the entire country. A strange calmness descended upon her, a sense of detachment that bordered on surreal. All the years of struggle, of silent endurance, had culminated in this single moment. It was a victory, not just for herself, but for Uncle Pei Sinian, the only person who had ever truly believed in her. She turned back to Shen Huijin, a faint smile playing on her lips. Uncle, she said, her voice clear and steady, each word imbued with a quiet power. I got my transcript. You'll know I Didi got 720 points. The first in the country. The blood drained from his face, leaving him ashen. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief, his lips parted in a silent bow. The carefully constructed facade of indifference crumbled, revealing the raw shock beneath. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Shen Yan didn't wait for his response. She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, a statue carved from disbelief and regret. The sunlight filtering through the leaves dappled the pavement before her, each patch of light a small, shimmering promise of the future she would now build for herself. A future free from the shadows of the Shen family. A future bathed in the warmth of her own hard-won success. The chandelier's crystalline facets scattered fractured light across the ballroom, casting a shimmering net over the celebratory scene. The air, thick with the aroma of expensive perfume and the murmur of polite conversation, felt suffocating to Shen Yan. Each congratulatory pat on the back, every forced smile directed her way, grated on her nerves like sandpaper. Top scorer in the college entrance exams. A feat no one, least of all the Shens, had expected. She clutched the award certificate, the embossed lettering digging into her palm, a tangible symbol of her escape. A shadow fell across her. Nian Nian, a voice, smooth as polished jade, called out. It was Shen Huaijin, her eldest adoptive brother. He held a champagne flute, its contents swirling like the unease in Shen Yan's stomach. Congratulations. We're all very surprised. He offered a tight-lipped smile, the kind one gives a distant acquaintance, not a sister. Surprised, she echoed internally. Not proud. Not happy. Surprised. The word hung in the air, a testament to their ingrained perception of her as the quiet, unremarkable shadow in their opulent lives. Thank you, she replied, her voice barely a whisper, each syllable coated in a bitterness they couldn't possibly taste. She wanted to scream, to tear the elegant mask from their faces, to expose the years of indifference, the casual cruelty they disguised as benign neglect. But years of practiced silence had built a wall around her, a fortress of composure that even she struggled to breach. Shen Huaili and Shen Huaizhou, the other two brothers, joined them, their faces mirroring Huaijin's strained politeness. They offered perfunctory congratulations, their eyes flitting away, unable to meet her gaze. Guilt, she realized, a flicker of cold satisfaction sparking within her. They feel it now, the weight of their complicity. The thought offered a sliver of solace amidst the suffocating atmosphere of forced celebration. Nian Nian, your mother and father are looking for you, Huaili said, his voice carefully neutral. The mention of her adoptive parents, her captors, sent a shiver down her spine. She could feel their eyes on her from across the room, Song Chunlin's painted smile, Shen Chang's forced joviality. The performance was sickening. For years, they had turned a blind eye to her suffering, their attention solely focused on their favored daughter, Shen Wana, who now stood beside them, radiant in a designer dress, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension swirling around her. Shen Yan took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation. As she approached, Song Chunlin reached out, her hand hovering just above Shen Yan's arm, not quite touching. Nian Nian, dear, such a wonderful achievement. We're so, she paused, searching for the right word, proud. The word felt hollow, devoid of genuine emotion. Shen Yan could see the calculations in her eyes, the frantic attempt to salvage appearances. Shen Chang cleared his throat. Your usual grades are only enough for a junior college. How could you? The unspoken accusation hung in the air, thick with suspicion. The implication was clear, she had cheated. The casual cruelty, the ingrained distrust, it was all there, laid bare in that single, unfinished sentence. A wave of nausea rolled over Shen Yan. This was it. The breaking point. The carefully constructed wall of composure began to crumble, replaced by a surge of raw, unfiltered anger. "My family is over there," she said, her voice trembling but firm, her gaze fixed on a figure standing near the entrance. Pei Sinian, her uncle, stood apart from the boisterous crowd, his presence a quiet anchor in the swirling chaos. He met her gaze, his eyes filled with a warmth that melted the ice around her heart. He was the one who had offered her refuge, a safe haven away from the gilded cage of the Shen family. He believed in her, supported her, loved her unconditionally. He was her true family. The Shens followed her gaze, their faces contorting in a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "What do you mean?" Song Chunlin asked, her voice laced with a sharp edge of panic. The carefully constructed facade was cracking, revealing the brittle insecurity beneath. Shen Yan turned back to them, her voice now steady, resolute. "From now on, I will cut off all ties with your Shen family." The words echoed in the opulent ballroom, silencing the surrounding conversations. She could feel the weight of their shocked stares, but their disapproval no longer held any power over her. "Nian Nian, you don't understand," Shen Chang began, his voice pleading, but she cut him off. "I understand perfectly," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I understand that I was never truly a part of this family. I understand that your concern is born of social embarrassment, not genuine affection. I understand that I deserve better." With that, she turned and walked towards Pei Sinian, leaving the stunned silence of the Shen family echoing behind her. The fractured light of the chandelier danced on her back, illuminating her path towards freedom. The banquet, the award, the Shens, they were all fading into the background, insignificant details in the tapestry of her new life. A life where she was finally free to be herself, to choose her own family, to forge her own destiny. And in that moment, amidst the lingering scent of perfume and the fading echoes of their disbelief, Shen Yan felt a profound sense of peace. The opulent chandelier in the Shen family dining room seemed to mock the silence that had fallen. Crystal prisms cast fractured light across the polished mahogany table, reflecting in the untouched delicacies that remained. Song Chunlin stared at the empty chair where Shen Yan usually sat, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She hadn't realized how much she relied on that quiet presence, that subtle reminder of the responsibility she had so carelessly ignored. The banquet, meant to celebrate Shen Wan'er's acceptance into a prestigious university, had ended abruptly, shattered by the revelation of Shen Yan's suffering. Pei Xinyan's words, sharp and accusatory, still echoed in the room. "You've built your happiness on her misery," he had said, his voice resonating with a chilling calm that was far more terrifying than any outburst. "And I won't let you destroy her any further." He had taken Shen Yan then, her small frame swallowed by his protective embrace, leaving the Shen family in stunned silence. Now, days later, that silence had become a suffocating weight. Shen Huijin paced the room restlessly, the guilt gnawing at him. He remembered the times he'd dismissed Shen Yan's quiet requests for help with her studies, too preoccupied with his own pursuits to notice the desperation in her eyes. He'd seen her exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, but had attributed it to laziness, never considering the weight she carried. It's all our fault, he thought, the realization a bitter pill. We pushed Nian Nian into the abyss step by step, Shen Huili sat slumped on a nearby sofa, his face pale and drawn. The usually boisterous and carefree young man was now haunted by the image of Shen Yan's frail figure disappearing behind the hospital doors. He recalled the casual cruelty he'd inflicted, the thoughtless jokes at her expense, the way he'd joined in with his brothers in ignoring her pleas. He'd never meant to cause real harm, but his indifference had been a weapon nonetheless. He clenched his fists, the guilt a physical ache in his chest. Underscore I must make Nian Nian forgive me underscore he vowed silently, the thought a fragile flicker of hope in the darkness. Shen Huaizhou, the eldest, remained outwardly stoic, but his tightly controlled expression betrayed the turmoil within. He had always prided himself on his rationality, his ability to see the bigger picture. But he had failed to see the suffering right under his nose, blinded by his ambition and the pressure to uphold the family's image. The silence in the house was broken by the shrill ring of the telephone. Song Chunlin flinched, her hand trembling as she reached for the receiver. The news was worse than she feared. Pei Group announced that it will never cooperate with us. The word struck her like a physical blow. The Pei Group's withdrawal meant the loss of a crucial partnership, jeopardizing the Shen family's business empire. The consequences of their actions were finally catching up to them. The color drained from Song Chunlin's face as she replaced the receiver. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. She looked at her sons, their faces mirroring her own despair, and a wave of helplessness washed over her. "What have we done?" she whispered, the question hanging heavy in the air. The days that followed were a blur of frantic meetings, desperate phone calls, and mounting losses. Business partners, once eager to collaborate, now distanced themselves, their polite refusals a thinly veiled condemnation. The Shen family's reputation, once their greatest asset, was now tarnished beyond repair. Shen Huaijin, driven by guilt and a desperate need to redeem himself, tried to contact Shen Yan. He visited Pei Xinyan's apartment, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. But the door remained closed, his pleas unanswered. He stood outside for hours, the rejection a physical pain. He imagined Shen Yan inside, safe and warm, surrounded by the care and affection she had been denied for so long. The thought brought a strange mix of relief and anguish. He deserved this rejection, he knew. He had failed her, and now he had to live with the consequences. He returned home, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. The vibrant energy that had once characterized him was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. He retreated to his room, the silence broken only by the muffled sobs that escaped his lips. Shen Huaili, too, grappled with his guilt. He tried to channel his remorse into action, throwing himself into his studies, hoping to somehow make amends for his past indifference. But the guilt clung to him, a constant reminder of his failings. He saw Shen Yan's face in every textbook, heard her quiet voice in the rustle of the leaves outside his window. He couldn't escape the memory of her suffering. Meanwhile, Shen Yan, under Pei Xinyan's care, was slowly healing. The comfortable silence of his apartment, the warmth of his concern, were a balm to her wounded spirit. She focused on her studies, finding solace in the familiar routine, the steady rhythm of learning. The upcoming college entrance exam loomed large, but she faced it with a newfound determination. This was her chance to build a new life, a life free from the shadows of the past. She studied late into the night, fueled by a desire to prove herself, to show the Shen family, and perhaps more importantly, herself, that she was capable of achieving great things. News of the Shen family's downfall reached her, but it evoked no sense of triumph, only a quiet sadness. She didn't want revenge, only peace. The college entrance exam arrived, and Shen Yan faced it with a calm focus she hadn't thought possible. As she filled in the answers, she felt a sense of liberation, a sense of control over her own destiny. She was no longer the quiet, neglected girl in the shadows. She was Shen Yan, strong and resilient, ready to face the future on her own terms. When the results were announced, Shen Yan's name was among the top scorers. She had done it. She had escaped the abyss and emerged victorious. The news reached the Shen family, a stark reminder of what they had lost. They had driven away the very person who could have been their salvation. Their empire was crumbling, their reputation tarnished, and their family fractured. And in the midst of their ruin, Shen Nian was rising, a phoenix from the ashes, ready to embrace a new beginning. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished wooden floor of Pei Xinyan's study. Dust motes danced in the golden light, a silent ballet echoing the quiet rhythm of Shen Nian's pencil scratching across paper. She was engrossed, brows furrowed in concentration as she wrestled with a particularly challenging physics problem. The scent of old books and brewing tea hung in the air, a comforting aroma that had become synonymous with her new life. A life away from the suffocating opulence of the Shen household, a life where silence wasn't laden with unspoken accusations and simmering resentments. Here, silence was a gentle blanket, a space for her thoughts to unfurl, to stretch, to finally breathe. A soft knock on the door broke her concentration. "Come in," she called, her voice still holding the slight tremor that had become a permanent fixture after years of walking on eggshells. Pei Xinyan entered, a warm smile softening the sharp angles of his face. He held a steaming mug in one hand and a small, velvet box in the other. "A little something to celebrate," he said, his voice a low rumble that held an undercurrent of affection. Shen Nian's heart fluttered. Celebrations were a foreign concept, a luxury she had never been afforded in the Shen household. Birthdays passed unnoticed, achievements dismissed, her very existence a mere footnote in their grand narrative. She lowered her gaze to the intricate carvings on the desk, a familiar wave of unease washing over her. "Why celebrate me?" The question echoed in her mind, a ghost of the Shen family's dismissive indifference. Pei Xinyan placed the mug before her, the warmth seeping through her fingers. "Your exam results came in. Top of your class," he said, his eyes twinkling with pride. He opened the velvet box, revealing a delicate silver ring adorned with a single, brilliant sapphire. Its facets caught the light, throwing tiny sparks of blue across the room. She stared at the ring, mesmerized. It was more beautiful than anything she had ever owned, a stark contrast to the hand-me-down clothes and chipped trinkets that had been her lot in the Shen family. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her throat constricting with a mixture of gratitude and a strange, unfamiliar sense of worthiness. "You don't have to say anything," Pei Xinyan replied softly. He took her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. Her fingers were still calloused from years of chores, a stark reminder of the life she had left behind. He slipped the ring onto her finger, the cool metal a soothing presence against her skin. "I will never lose to you," he murmured, his words echoing a private conversation they'd shared weeks ago about her fears and insecurities. "This ring is called the crown. It's priceless, like you." Tears welled in Shen Nian's eyes, blurring her vision. It wasn't just the ring, it was the gesture, the acknowledgement, the unwavering belief in her that she had craved for so long. Priceless. The word resonated deep within her, shattering the carefully constructed walls of self-deprecation the Shen family had built around her. She looked up at Pei Xinyan, her gaze filled with a mixture of gratitude and burgeoning self-worth. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, truly valued. The following weeks unfolded in a tranquil rhythm of study and quiet companionship. Shen Nian threw herself into her university preparations, her newfound confidence fueling her ambition. The memories of the Shen family's callous indifference began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of self-assurance. She visited them once, a brief, awkward encounter fraught with unspoken accusations and thinly veiled resentment. Shen Huijin, Shen Huili, and Shen Huizhou, her adoptive brothers, hovered in the background, their faces etched with a mixture of guilt and bewilderment. They had finally realized the extent of her suffering, the depth of their own complicity. Their belated remorse, however, offered little solace. The damage was done, the bonds irrevocably broken. Song Chunlin and Shen Chang, her adoptive parents, remained stubbornly entrenched in their denial, their words laced with thinly veiled accusations of ingratitude. Shen Wan'er, her adoptive sister, remained oblivious, her world untouched by the storm that had ravaged Shen Yan's life. The visit served as a stark reminder of the chasm that now separated her from the family she had once longed to belong to. Leaving the opulent Shen mansion, she felt a sense of liberation, a final severing of ties. The weight of their judgment no longer held her captive. She was free. Back in the quiet sanctuary of Pei Xinyan's study, Shen Yan found solace in her books, in the gentle hum of the city outside, in the simple act of breathing without fear. The sapphire ring on her finger became a tangible symbol of her newfound strength, a constant reminder of her own worth. She was no longer the timid, neglected girl who had lived in the shadows. She was Shen Yan, a survivor, a scholar, a young woman with a future as bright as the sapphire on her finger. The crown was hers, not by birthright, but by virtue of her resilience, her unwavering spirit, and the unwavering love of the man who had chosen to see her, to believe in her, to finally give her the home she had always longed for. The silence that now surrounded her was no longer the suffocating silence of neglect, but the peaceful silence of contentment, the quiet hum of a life finally blooming.